Imagine standing in front of the mirror on an ordinary morning. You see the reflection, the face you have come to know, shaped by years of choices, responsibilities, and expectations. The world may call it success. You have followed the plan, fulfilled the roles, behaved as expected. But somewhere inside, an echo whispers that something feels off. Not wrong in a dramatic way. Just incomplete. Like a piece of the puzzle never made it into the frame. Have you ever paused long enough to wonder if the life you are living is really yours? Or if it was quietly assigned to you before you ever had a say? Are you being true to who you are or merely consistent with who you were told to be? You wake up, go through your routine, accomplish your tasks, maintain your relationships. But under it all is a vague sense of disconnection. It hides behind the busy days and quiet nights. It shows itself in the moments when things slow down. In those rare still hours when you feel the truth knocking and you pretend not to hear it. Do you choose safety or authenticity? Applause or alignment? Do you follow the path or question its direction? Most people never stop to ask these questions. Not because they do not matter, but because the answers might change everything. The answers might demand that you confront the unknown inside you. And for many, that unknown feels far more frightening than any failure. Yet Carl Jung believed that true freedom begins the moment you stop running from yourself. His psychology was not built for surface comfort. In today's session, we will walk through Jung's profound insights about the human psyche. We will examine the path he called individuation, the inner journey where the real self is not created, but uncovered. You will discover how the persona, the shadow, the anima and animus, and the self are not just psychological concepts, but living forces shaping your thoughts, emotions, and destiny. This journey is not abstract. It is deeply human, and it begins now. Not with grand declarations, but with a quiet and honest confrontation. It begins when you are ready to stop pretending and start listening. The road ahead is not paved with answers. It is carved by the courage to ask better questions. Questions that do not flatter the ego but challenge the very assumptions on which it stands. Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." The question is not whether the journey is worth it. The question is whether you are willing to face yourself to find out. There is a version of you that walks through the world each day. It smiles when it should, speaks when it must, performs when it is expected. This version is polished, composed, and socially acceptable. But it is not the whole of you. You are not your job title. You are not your achievements. You are not the version of yourself you curate for others to see. Yet these layers become so tightly wrapped around you that removing them feels like tearing away skin. You fear what lies beneath because you have spent so long perfecting the surface. Jung saw this tension clearly. He understood that most people are trapped not by external forces but by their own attachment to a socially acceptable version of themselves. And the more we identify with the persona, the more we abandon the parts of us that do not fit within it. You may ask yourself, who would I be if I stopped performing? Would anyone still recognize me? Would I recognize myself? This is where the inner conflict begins. A deep, quiet war between who you appear to be and who you really are. The more you invest in the persona, the more disconnected you become from the self. The mask may earn applause, but it cannot give you peace. Imagine the exhaustion of constantly adjusting your tone, your expression, your truth. Just to be understood. Just to be accepted. Over time, this constant management becomes a burden. A performance with no end. A smile with no rest. But the moment you start to question the persona, you create the space for something more authentic to emerge. You begin to separate your true nature from the roles you were given. Jung did not encourage rebellion for its own sake. He did not call for the destruction of the persona, but for awareness. Conscious use of the mask, rather than unconscious enslavement to it. He wrote, "Every calling must have its mask. But the danger is in identifying with it completely. So the question becomes, are you using the persona, or is it using you? The journey toward the true self begins with this clarity. You cannot find what is real until you acknowledge what is not. And the persona, no matter how convincing, is not the full story. Beneath the surface of who you present to the world lives another part of you that rarely sees the light. It does not appear in polite conversation or social rituals, yet it influences your decisions in ways you may never consciously recognize. Carl Jung called this part of the psyche the shadow. Not because it is evil or malicious, but because it operates just outside the reach of awareness, moving through your thoughts and behaviors without permission. The shadow holds everything you were told not to be. It stores your repressed anger, your unspoken envy, your unacknowledged fears, and even the joy you felt ashamed to express. It gathers what you had to leave behind in order to be accepted, praised, or simply left alone. Over time, what was pushed aside doesn't disappear. It waits. You might believe you are in control of your actions, that your personality is solid and consistent. But have you ever felt a sudden surge of emotion that seemed too intense for the moment? Have you ever caught yourself overreacting, or pulling back from something without knowing why? These moments are not glitches in your character. They are signals from the shadow trying to break through the silence. Rather than confronting what unsettles us, we often project it outward. We find ourselves disturbed by the traits of others without realizing we are confronting a reflection. The need to criticize, to distance, to condemn, these are not just reactions to the world but echoes of the parts of ourselves we would rather not meet. What if the behaviors you cannot tolerate in others mirror something you once disowned in yourself? Jung understood this with profound clarity. He believed that until the unconscious becomes conscious, it will quietly direct your life while you remain convinced that it is fate. The shadow is not a flaw to be corrected. It is a part of the human experience to be understood. Within it lies not only the emotions you were taught to suppress but the creativity, instinct, and truth you were never allowed to explore. Many people imagine wholeness as perfection, a life free from conflict or contradiction. But what if the real path to wholeness begins not with self-improvement, but with self-confrontation? What if your deepest strength is hidden beneath what you most fear to feel? There is nothing passive about shadow work. It demands presence, honesty, and a willingness to revisit the chapters of your life you quietly closed. And yet it is here, within this silent reckoning, that you begin to reclaim yourself. You do not face the shadow to defeat it. You face it to understand it. And in that understanding, the division within you begins to dissolve. The parts of you that once battled in secrecy begin to integrate into something more solid, more centered, more real. Jung wrote that enlightenment does not come by imagining figures of light but by making the darkness conscious. To do that is not to sink into despair but to rise into authenticity. As we move deeper into this journey, we will turn to the inner forces that shape how you love, how you relate, and how you find balance between who you are and who you were told to be. These forces live not in the dark but in the forgotten. They are the Anima and Animus, and they hold the next key to your inner wholeness. Deep within the psyche, beyond the persona you perform and the shadow you suppress, there exist two profound forces that shape your inner world in ways few ever recognize. These are the Anima and Animus, Jung's names for the unconscious feminine and masculine energies that exist within every individual. Regardless of gender, both forces live within you. They are not roles or stereotypes. Over time, society carved clear lines between what is acceptable for men and what is expected of women. Strength was separated from sensitivity, reason from intuition, logic from emotion. But what if these separations were never natural? What if they were imposed? What if the parts of yourself you've learned to mute are not weaknesses but the keys to your internal equilibrium? The anima is the symbolic feminine within. It expresses itself through emotion, receptivity, empathy, creativity, and the deep capacity to connect. When it is repressed, a man may find himself cut off from his emotional life, overly rational, or unable to form authentic relationships. He may fear vulnerability, dismiss intuition, or mistake sensitivity for weakness. The animus is the symbolic masculine within. It manifests as assertiveness, clarity, structure, analysis, and the drive to act. When it is unacknowledged, a woman may find herself silencing her own thoughts, surrendering authority, or doubting the power of her voice. She may internalize dependence while secretly longing for direction. But the truth is not about adopting traits from the opposite gender. It is about reclaiming the full range of your psyche. Jung believed that the journey toward the self could not be complete without integration of these inner forces. Without the anima and animus, your inner world remains lopsided, and your relationships echo that imbalance. When the anima and animus are ignored, they tend to appear in distorted form. They show up in dreams, relationships, projections, and irrational attachments. You might be drawn to people not because of who they are, but because they carry the pieces you've lost touch with inside yourself. But when these forces are brought into conscious awareness, they become powerful allies. The anima can restore emotional truth, the kind that transcends words. The animus can reawaken the inner voice that says you are allowed to take up space in the world. And together, they create an internal balance that allows you to move through life with depth and direction. Jung once observed that the meeting of the two energies within the psyche is what prepares the ground for transformation. The integration of opposites, feminine and masculine, feeling and thinking, being and doing, is not about becoming someone else. It is about becoming whole. At the center of Jung's psychological vision stands a single concept that holds the weight of a lifetime's transformation. He called it individuation. Unlike most paths of growth that focus on improvement or success, individuation is not about becoming better. It is about becoming whole. Individuation begins with the recognition that your conscious personality is only a fragment of who you are. Beneath it lies the unconscious world, rich with emotion, instinct, memory, and meaning. As long as these elements remain unacknowledged, you live in tension. You may succeed outwardly but feel misaligned inwardly. You may feel driven without knowing what drives you. The journey of individuation is not a straight line. It does not promise comfort. It begins when you stop chasing perfection and start listening to your inner contradictions. The parts of you that argue, that resist, that confuse and disturb, these are not obstacles. They are signals. They point to the parts of you still waiting to be seen. Jung believed that the human psyche has an innate drive toward integration. This means that your unconscious mind is not trying to sabotage you. It is trying to complete you. Your dreams, emotions, and even your conflicts are not mistakes. They are Jung once said that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. Individuation is how that privilege becomes reality. There is a part of your mind that never stops observing, never stops remembering, and never stops speaking. But it does not speak in language. It speaks in symbols. And more often than not, it speaks through dreams. To the rational mind, these messages may seem chaotic or meaningless. Yet to Carl Jung, they were among the most important clues to understanding the inner world. Jung believed that the unconscious is not simply a storage place for repressed thoughts. It is an intelligent and purposeful force that communicates through image, metaphor, and emotion. Every dream you have ever had carries a message, and every symbol within it has roots far deeper than your conscious story. Have you ever woken up from a dream that lingered long after your day had begun? Have you ever felt disturbed or awakened by a single image that made no logical sense, yet seemed to carry a kind of personal truth? These moments are not accidental. They are moments of contact. Something in you is trying to be heard. The unconscious does not argue or persuade. It shows. It presents you with symbols that speak directly to the deeper layers of your identity. When you ignore them, they return. When you resist them, they transform. The psyche is not passive. It wants to be seen, and dreams are the language through which it begins to reveal itself. Have you ever thought that what appears strange or senseless in your dreams might be more honest than what you tell yourself when you are awake? The dream does not flatter the ego. It exposes the contradiction. It reveals what you do not want to admit, yet most need to know. Jung developed the practice of active imagination as a way to interact with these symbols. Instead of analyzing them from a distance, he invited people to engage directly. To speak with the image, to follow its movement, to let it unfold. In doing so, the unconscious is not treated as a mystery to be solved, but as a part of you that carries knowledge beyond the surface of reason. Dreams do not come to entertain you. They come to realign you. And the more willing you are to listen, the more clearly they speak. Symbols begin to appear not only in dreams, but also in your daily life, in repeated patterns, strange coincidences, and emotional echoes that defy explanation. You might notice that the same situation keeps arising with different people. You might hear the same phrase from unrelated places. You might be drawn to the same type of story over and over again. These repetitions are not random. They are expressions of meaning trying to take form in your conscious life. We will step beyond the personal and move into the shared territory of the human psyche. The unconscious is not only yours. It is also ours. Jung called this the collective unconscious, and within it live the ancient patterns of story, identity, and myth that shape your life whether you are aware of them or not. While much of your inner world may feel personal, shaped by memory, experience, and individual desire, there is a deeper layer that connects you to every other human being who has ever lived. Carl Jung called this the collective unconscious. It is not filled with memories of your own life, but with patterns that have existed far longer than any single person. These patterns are not random impressions. They are structures of meaning, built into the human psyche itself. Jung believed that the collective unconscious is made of archetypes, universal forms that shape how you perceive the world, how you behave, and even how you dream. They are not visible in the way objects are, but their influence can be felt in every myth, every story, every recurring human experience. They are the mother, the hero, the wise old man, the trickster, the child, the shadow, and the countless other images that return again and again across cultures and centuries. Have you ever wondered why certain stories resonate so deeply, even when you do not share the language, religion, or history of the people who told them? Have you ever felt a strange familiarity with a character in a novel or film, as if they were mirroring something you always knew but never had words for? That is the effect of archetypes moving through culture into your individual mind. They are not taught. They are inherited. These archetypes do not dictate your behavior, but they form the invisible framework through which you interpret life. The hero's journey, the fall from grace, the battle between good and evil, these are not just stories we consume. They are reflections of what is unfolding within. And whether you are conscious of it or not, these patterns shape your choices, your fears, your longings, and your sense of purpose. Jung understood that much of what we believe to be our private inner life is actually rooted in something far older and shared. The struggles you face may feel like your own, but they often mirror the stories humanity has always told. The anxiety before a major transition, the longing to find a guide, the confrontation with the unknown, all of these are chapters that repeat not because you are weak or lost, but because you are human. This understanding does not diminish your individuality. On the contrary, it expands it. It reveals that your journey is not isolated. You are part of something much larger. You carry within you the stories of thousands who have walked before you. And through their patterns, you are offered insight, guidance, and meaning. Have you ever thought that the myth you loved as a child might still be guiding your life today? Or that the recurring image in your dreams might be older than your memories? The collective unconscious is not a relic of the past. It is alive, active, and moving within you. Jung saw that healing and self-discovery often involve reconnecting with these ancient roots. Not to be ruled by them, but to recognize that your life has depth because it echoes something timeless. Beyond the persona, The shadow, the anima and animus, and even the archetypes, there is something central, something whole. The self is not an ideal to be reached or a persona to be perfected. It is already present within you. But like a mountain covered in fog, it remains hidden until the mist begins to clear. You may have glimpsed it in moments of deep stillness, in the quiet after grief, or in the clarity that follows profound insight. These moments do not add something new to you. They uncover what was always there. Have you ever had a fleeting moment where you felt entirely yourself, without effort, without defense, without the need to be anyone else? A moment when your inner voice aligned with your outer expression, and the conflict within you fell silent? These are not coincidences. They are moments of contact with the self. Jung saw the self as the central archetype of psychological life. It is the force that draws you toward balance, integration, and purpose. While the ego is concerned with appearances, control, and social belonging, the self is concerned with truth. It does not flatter. It does not bend to pressure. It calls you to become whole. The path to the self is not paved with easy answers. It requires the courage to confront every piece of who you are, especially the parts you have buried, denied, or misunderstood. The persona must be questioned. The shadow must be faced. Have you ever felt as though you were circling around something essential, something just beyond the edge of awareness? That feeling of incompletion, of searching without knowing what you seek, often points to the forgotten relationship with the self. You are not lost. You are being called. The journey toward the self is not an escape from life. It is an entry into it with both feet on the ground and both eyes open. It allows you to live with depth, clarity, and an inner authority that does not depend on approval. It does not erase your struggles, but it transforms how you hold them. Jung believed that the self is not just the center of your being. It is also the goal toward which all psychological growth naturally moves. It is not created. It is revealed. We will turn toward the forces that make this journey difficult. The inner resistance, the fear of change, the comfort of the familiar. Because the path to wholeness, though natural, is rarely smooth. And understanding the obstacles is just as important as knowing the way forward. By now, you have seen that the journey toward your true self is not simply a matter of desire. It is a path of integration that asks more than willingness. It asks for honesty, persistence, and the ability to face what you would rather avoid. And yet, even with insight, even with understanding, something still resists. Carl Jung understood this resistance intimately. He saw that the greatest obstacles to psychological wholeness are often internal, not because we are incapable of growth, but because we are afraid of what growth demands. Change, no matter how necessary, always carries loss. The loss of certainty, the loss of old identities, the loss of the familiar discomforts that we have learned to live with. You might long for transformation, but feel the pull to remain exactly where you are. You might seek truth, but find yourself clinging to the mask that once protected you. Have you ever felt that something within you wants to move forward, yet something else holds back with equal force? This conflict is not weakness. It is the natural tension between the ego and the self. The ego, concerned with order and control, resists anything that threatens its narrative. It would rather protect the known pain than risk an unknown freedom. And so, we hesitate. We rationalize. We distract ourselves with progress on the surface, while avoiding the deeper shifts that true growth requires. Jung saw this hesitation as part of the process. He did not believe that resistance should be judged or overcome with force. Instead, it should be understood. Have you ever thought that the part of you avoiding change might be trying to protect something fragile? That the resistance itself might hold a story that deserves compassion, not condemnation? The fear of change often masks the fear of becoming a stranger to yourself. As long as you stay within the limits of the familiar, you know how to behave. You know what is expected. But when you begin to change, the roles shift. relationships adjust. The world reflects back something different. And the question arises, who will you be if you are no longer who you were? Jung taught that transformation cannot happen without facing this fear. And more importantly, that fear is not the end of the journey. It is the threshold. You are not meant to conquer it by pretending it does not exist. You are meant to walk through it with awareness, with clarity, with the understanding that wholeness comes at a cost, but that cost is the price of authenticity. The deeper fear is often not failure, but freedom. Because when you are no longer shaped by expectation or fear, you must begin shaping yourself. That kind of responsibility can feel overwhelming. And yet, it is the only path that leads to inner authority. Have you ever felt that the version of you the world sees is not the version you are becoming? That something in you is evolving, even if the world cannot yet recognize it? That quiet transformation, though invisible at first, is the most important change you will ever make. Let's explore what it means to reclaim your inner authority. To stop outsourcing your worth, and instead return to the quiet, grounded power that lives within you. The power to choose not from fear, but from alignment. There comes a point on the journey inward when the path no longer curves outward for permission, approval, or applause. Instead, it turns inward and asks a single question with absolute clarity. Are you willing to trust yourself? To Carl Jung, this moment marked the return to what he called inner authority. It is not control. It is not domination. It is a grounded sense of knowing that arises from integration, not imitation. From childhood, you are taught to look outward for guidance. You learn how to please, how to behave, how to succeed within a structure that rewards conformity and discourages introspection. But as you grow, you begin to sense that the answers offered by others no longer fit the questions forming inside you. The map handed to you at birth cannot guide you toward your own inner territory. Have you ever followed every rule and still felt lost? Have you ever fulfilled every expectation only to realize the person you became does not feel like the person you truly are? These moments are not failures. They are turning points. Signs that the time has come to stop outsourcing your decisions to the world around you and begin listening to the quiet authority within. Inner authority is not arrogance. It is not a rejection of wisdom from others. Rather, it is the ability to discern which voices belong in your journey and which ones no longer serve it. It is the clarity that arises when your choices reflect your values, not your fears. When you act not to be seen, but because something within you knows this is the way. Jung believed that reclaiming your inner authority is not just a psychological achievement. It is a moral and spiritual task. To live by your own truth means you are no longer held hostage by the expectations of a world that does not know your soul. You begin to act not in rebellion, but in alignment. You begin to speak not for attention, but from understanding. Have you ever thought that the approval you keep chasing might never be enough, because what you truly need is permission from yourself? What if the stability you seek from others is already available in the stillness of your own conviction? This shift is not immediate. It begins with small decisions. The moment you say no without guilt. The moment you choose rest without explanation. The moment you speak a truth you once hid behind a smile. Each act, however small, becomes a step away from dependency and toward sovereignty. You begin to recognize that authenticity does not require a stage. It requires a foundation. And that foundation is built every time you choose to trust the voice inside you over the noise around you. Jung understood that a life lived from the self cannot be dictated. It must be discovered. And once discovered, it must be protected, not by walls, but by the strength of your own presence. Individuation is not a theory to study. It is a way of being to live. Understanding Jung's psychology is not the end of the journey. Insight, no matter how profound, must be lived. The process of individuation is not a single event or a private epiphany. It unfolds through repetition, reflection, and conscious choice. It is not reserved for rare moments of breakthrough. It lives in your routines, your relationships, and the way you respond to what each day brings. Have you ever thought that transformation might begin not in the grand gestures, but in the way you carry yourself through the ordinary? In the moment you pause instead of react. In the moment you tell the truth when it would be easier to stay silent. In the moment you stay present with discomfort rather than escaping into distraction. Integration is the process of bringing together what was once divided. It means allowing your outer life to reflect your inner truth. It means speaking not from the persona, but from the self. It means relating to others not from fear or habit, but from clarity. Jung saw this as the task of a lifetime, not to perfect the self, but to fully inhabit it. One way to begin is by making space for inner dialogue. Just as you converse with others, you can begin to relate to the many parts of your psyche. What is the persona trying to protect? What is the shadow asking you to feel? What dream symbol keeps returning, and why? This is not analysis for the sake of analysis. It is a practice of honest listening. Active imagination, journaling, and dream reflection are not mystical rituals. They are tools for grounding your awareness in the truth of your experience. They help you bridge the unconscious and the conscious, not through theory, but through real-time attention. Have you ever noticed how patterns repeat until you are ready to see them? That readiness is what integration looks like in practice. Even your challenges become part of the work. When frustration arises, you can ask what part of you feels unheard. When conflict appears, you can examine what story you are living through. These moments are not setbacks. They are invitations to deepen your understanding and reclaim your wholeness. Integration does not require perfection. It requires presence. Each time you choose to be aware rather than automatic, you bring another part of yourself into the light. Each time you speak from alignment rather than performance, you strengthen your connection to the self. Have you ever felt the quiet satisfaction of acting in a way that truly reflected who you are? Not for recognition, not for reward, but because it felt right? That is what this path is about. Not chasing a new identity, but removing what is false so that what is real can emerge. Jung taught that healing begins when we become whole, not when we become better. And wholeness is not abstract. It is felt. In the way you breathe, the way you move, the way you meet the world with open eyes and an open heart. Now that we have walked together through the landscapes of Carl Jung's psychology, from the persona to the shadow, from the anima and animus to the self, you may feel something stirring beneath the surface. Not the noise of inspiration, but the calm certainty that something essential has been remembered. This journey has not been about changing who you are. It has been about uncovering what was always there, waiting for the silence to return. Have you ever felt that your life was more fragmented than it needed to be? That the parts of yourself you kept hidden were not flawed, but forgotten? That your longing for peace was never about escaping the world, but about learning how to fully exist within it? The process of individuation shows you that peace does not come from control. It comes from coherence. To become whole is not to become perfect. It is to stop dividing yourself into acceptable and unacceptable parts. It is to bring your contradictions, your wounds, your desires, and your truths into one unified experience. The self is not an ideal to chase. It is the reality you begin to live when you stop pretending. Jung understood that every human being is born with the potential to become whole. But that potential is often buried beneath layers of conditioning, fear, and silence. The work is not to create meaning where there is none. The work is to rediscover the meaning that has always been woven into your being. Have you ever thought that your greatest strength might be hidden in the very parts of you were once ashamed of? That the feelings you feared were not signs of weakness, but signals of depth? That your pain was not an error, but a message waiting to be heard? As you move forward, you do not need to remember every concept. What matters is that you remember yourself. That you begin to walk with more honesty, more awareness, and more compassion for the path you have walked and the one that still lies ahead. Integration is not a finish line. It is a way of living. It is the quiet decision to meet each moment with presence, to listen when your psyche speaks, and to respond not from habit, but from truth. You may still feel uncertain at times. That is natural. But uncertainty, when held with awareness, becomes a doorway to discovery. This journey is yours. No one can walk it for you. But by walking it, you become something more than an individual. You become a presence of depth in a world that often remains on the surface. You offer your authenticity not as a performance, but as a quiet invitation for others to do the same. Jung once said that the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. But in that acceptance lies the beginning of real freedom. The freedom to live without hiding. The freedom to feel without shame. The freedom to become whole. So now, return to your life. Not as someone who has learned something new, but as someone who has remembered something true. The self is not far away. It is not a mystery. It is you. And it is ready.